Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In today's episode, we talk about the historic US oil price crash and whether it will have any impact on India. We will also talk about India's doubling rate of COVID-19 and the preparations the government is making for a possible second wave of the outbreak. But first, we talk about the Palghar lynchings. Last week on Thursday, a brutal incident took place in the Gadchinchle village of the Palghar district, which is around 140 kilometers north of Mumbai. In the village, 3 men from Mumbai were lynched by a mob. 2 of these men were sadhus who, along with the driver, were headed to Surat to attend a funeral. The lynching of these men took place right under the nose of a police team led by 2 officers. In this segment, Srinath Rao, a reporter from Mumbai, joins us on a call to talk about the incident and the police's role in the matter. Srinath, could you first tell our listeners the series of events that led to the lynchings that took place in the Gadchinchle village last week?
So what happened last Thursday night is there's these 2 sadhus who'd been staying at an ashram in Kandivali in Mumbai's northern suburbs. They were to attend a funeral in Surat, Gujarat. They hired a car with this private driver also living in Kandivali. And of course, even though lockdown is still in force, they did manage to get quite some distance. To understand, they got as far as Maharashtra's border with the Union Territory of Dadra and Nagar Haveli, which just borders Maharashtra's northernmost coastal district of Palghar. To understand that, that's a really long distance to drive. And you got to pass through multiple checkposts. Police security on roads, as in the rest of the country, is really beefed up. Where you'd normally have, say, 1 or 2 nakabandis or checkposts, there's at least 3 or 4 in that place. And what helps people, at least in Palghar, is with these interior roads, they did manage to get there. So what happened is they were turned back at the border by the forest guard. They were told they can't proceed any further. You just can't cross state lines. The trouble began when they were asked to head back. Now, what's happening in some of these tribal villages in the interior of Palghar is, for the last fortnight, there's been a lot of rumors going around that there's thieves and organ harvesting traffickers, child kidnappers on the prowl after dark. So this has led to villagers getting very anxious at night. They've not been sleeping. The local MLA has told us they've been forming night patrols. So this car from Bombay, the villagers mistook it as thieves or child kidnappers again. And when a small group of villagers initially gathered at the car, this is when the forest guard decided to call in the police. Now, the nearest police station is Skasa police station, it's about 40 kilometers away. When the SHO reached, it was already about 45 minutes later. He claims initially he wasn't told what the strength of the crowd was. So it was initially just about 4 policemen against a crowd of 100. By the time another backup of, say, 16 or 15 more policemen came, this is when things got out of hand. The villagers started attacking the sadhus and the driver. They'd been initially taken to the forest department chowki thinking they'd be safe. The police then decided to try and attempt to at least drive out in their vans, but the mob dragged the sadhus and the drivers, as seen in the video. They dragged them out of the car and they assaulted them quite brutally. And all 3 of them, by the time the police could finally take them to the hospital, they declared dead on arrival. It took about 2 more hours for additional reinforcements, including the district superintendent, to finally arrive. And it was only when there's about, say, 300 policemen could the police actually gain some control of the situation. And it was only, say, next morning that they rounded up some 110 people. This includes 9 juveniles. And by that time, a really serious incident had gone down by then.
You mentioned the video, which has now surfaced on social media and has gone viral. Could you describe, and the video is quite graphic, could you describe to our listeners what can be seen in the video?
The small video that's been circulating on social media, what you can basically see is the oldest of the 3 men, Kalpavrukshgiri, as he's been later identified. He's chased around that village area just near the checkpost. He's pleading with a policeman to save him, but they're completely surrounded by villagers and they're really heavily armed. There's some who have sticks. There's some who have stones, sickles. The video shows the policeman, he just deserts the old man. That mob chases him, that old man, around, and finally, when he can't run any further, that's when the mob completely descend upon him and beat him senseless. It's quite a graphic video.
I mean, this is a situation where the police was there. How come the police was not able to stop these villagers? And I mean, like you described, you can see the police sort of moving away from the mob and letting, the mob take over and beat the man. And like you described, they're also clearly stopping the police from doing their job, stopping the police vehicle. What sort of questions are raised about police inaction in this incident?
I mean, from what the SHO, this is Assistant Police Inspector Anand Rao Kale, who I spoke to last night, the way he explained is when the initial call was reported to the police from the forest guard, Officer Kale says he wasn't given an exact number of how many villagers had gathered. So that's how he justifies leaving just with 3 people, I mean, against a crowd which he says he had no estimate of. And even when, say, backup of a few dozen men finally did arrive much later, they're still completely outnumbered. Now, the police version is that the road towards Gadchinchle village, it had been barricaded with stones and branches, clearly put to prevent the police reaching the village at all. And once at the spot, and this is a police version, is that they're surrounded, they did not have an escape route. But yeah, I mean, the questions it raises is maybe from what Kali said, I mean, given the seriousness of the incident that was reported to him, the fact that he did not ask for a proper amount, like get a good estimate of how many people he was up against. It was only when he finally reached the spot that he could make an initial assessment and call in so many people, knowing that backup was at least an hour away. And in case of the SP and a lot of, say, 100, 200 policemen, and they were at least 2 more hours away.
I mean, these kind of incidents where, there are rumors going around about child kidnapping, organ harvesting, organ trafficking. I mean, we've seen that in the past, right? In 2018, we saw this in Maharashtra. Last year, we saw this, a number of cases in UP. And in fact, in the piece that you wrote for the paper on Tuesday, you point out that, the police themselves had faced this incident 2 days back, where they responded a situation similar to this in the same district. Could you talk about what that incident was?
Yeah, so the 2 senior-most officers at the spot, this is CPI Kale and a sub-inspector at the police station, Sudhir Katare, 2 senior-most police officers at Kasa. They'd faced exactly the same incident at another village 60 kilometers away just 2 days previously. This is when 2 doctors were traveling to Thane city from another tribal hamlet in Palghar. They'd been distributing food, providing medical supplies and health checkups for very remote communities. So what happened again is, like I mentioned, about these rumors which have been going around in the district for the last 2 weeks. The car ferrying the doctors was again accosted by a group of villagers on this main road. The villagers were again under the impression that these were thieves. And in this instance, the police was not very far away. They could reach the site of the incident quite early. They also knew exactly how many people they were up against. So they came prepared accordingly. But again, I mean, this is another case where they just barely managed to escape. The crowd again got violent. They resisted efforts from the police to stay subdued or calm down, or just didn't want to listen to the fact that the occupants of the car are actually doctors out to assist people during the lockdown. And again, both the policemen who've now been suspended, they were assaulted with sticks. They were hit by stones on their backs. They were injured, although not very badly. But again, this is just a case of where they just managed to escape.
I mean, this incident obviously has created national headlines. It's been on the front pages of different newspapers. Could you talk about just the kind of reactions that it has got all across, and including from the media and from major politicians?
So I guess from what we've been seeing, at least on social media and also in newspapers, it hasn't taken very long for the incident to be given a communal angle, a spin. The initial speculation from a lot of people spreading unverified claims on social media is that there were Muslims involved in the attack. And there have been people who have tweeted saying you can hear Muslim names being said in the video. And these are claims which have later been shown to be not true. The other spin that has been given is that the attackers who are tribals, that they have been brainwashed or hypnotized into attacking the deceased. And the other theory that we're seeing is the fact that these tribals deliberately attacked saints just because they were wearing orange robes or saffron robes. But ever since then, I mean, all of these rumors, they prompted Maharashtra's Home Minister, the Chief Minister Uddhav Thackeray himself in his address yesterday reiterated that there is no communal angle to this, and he's pleaded with people not to spread unverified rumors.
Srinath says that authorities are still investigating how rumors of organ traffickers and child kidnappers spread in the region. Though, as we mentioned earlier, these incidents have unfortunately happened in the past as well. Last year, after a series of such incidents took place in UP, we had done an episode detailing this problem of mob violence and how platforms like WhatsApp worsens them. We have provided a link to that episode in today's description. Do check it out. And next, we talk about the US oil price crash. On Monday, the US oil markets created history when the best quality of crude oil in the world fell to minus $40.32 a barrel in New York.
CNN breaking news. Oil prices have turned negative. The most extraordinary development that took place today.
Price of a barrel of West Texas Intermediate, which is the benchmark for US oil, today traded as low as minus $40 a barrel.
Meaning people would pay you today to take their oil off their hands.
This was the lowest that crude oil price has ever been. In this segment, Udit Misra, who writes on the economy for the Indian Express, joins us to explain the reasons for this historic crash.
So it was a classic case of demand-supply mismatch. Some of the readers would know that over the last few months, oil prices have been coming off their highs. At the start of the year, it was around 60, closer to March, it was around 20. And early in March, the basic mechanism which was in play to set oil prices, which was OPEC countries and Russia, typically deciding amongst themselves what should be the production to ensure a certain amount of price. That fell apart. Early in March, there was a flare-up between Saudi Arabia and Russia. The prices crashed by, I think, 30-odd%. And these countries continued producing far more oil than was actually required in the market. And this was happening at a time when coronavirus was spreading all across the world and demand was plummeting with each passing day. And especially in the developed world, think of all transport and industry demand sort of shutting down with every passing day. So we were in the last, say, from the start of March, looking at a scenario where there was huge supply forming and very little demand. Demand was sort of coming off the peak. And there were efforts made to find an agreement between these countries, which happened last week. And they decided to cut oil production by 6 million barrels a day. But even that was not enough because demand was sort of getting reduced by almost 9 million barrels a day. And so we reached a point on Monday where it was the last for May contracts in the US. And these were the contracts about the West Texas Intermediate, which is one type of crude oil. And basically, both the holders of this contract, they realized that the global supply glut was such that there was no storage space left, especially in US, because, in the short term, you simply cannot store it somewhere else. And the producers wanted to get rid of that oil because they also realized that there was no place to store. So both the holders of this contract and those who were selling the oil both wanted to get rid of the oil. Now, what explains minus 40? Somebody can say, okay, the price can go to zero. But what explains the minus territory? What explains the minus territory is that there is a cost associated with holding oil, paying for the transportation, paying for the storage. Now, if you're looking at a scenario where oil is in excess and you might have to hold on to a considerable quantity of oil for a long period of time, that's a huge cost. So people who are making the bets of trying to get off that contract by even paying $40 a barrel, they were still trying to make a prudent decision by saying that, okay, let me cut my losses. If I was to hold the oil, purchase this oil eventually and hold it, I might have to pay, say, I'm just hypothetically saying, say, $50 a barrel. But under the circumstances, let me get rid of this contract at 40. So I'm still reducing my losses. So that is what explains this remarkable, bizarre thing that oil prices go negative.
So in a typical scenario, when we look at other commodities, when the demand goes down, you stop the supply, and then you have a situation where when the demand was going down, the prices was also going down, but then you stop the supply and you might look at the price increasing again. But I mean, this scenario is a bit different because you let the price go down to minus, having a situation where producers are paying the buyers to take oil off their hands. So in what sense is oil different that way? Why can't you stop the oil production soon enough so that you don't have a situation like this?
Think of it this way. When you talk about an oil well, it's the way this business runs. When you are running an oil well, you simply cannot just shut it off like maybe a tube light or a lamp. You just simply cannot just by a flick of a switch. You can't just shut off a oil well and the next day say, okay, maybe we need more oil and switch it again. It's not only more complex exercise, but it's also very costly. Millions of dollars are spent if once you shut it off, then to start it. So now if you owned an oil well, right, and if I said that, listen, I do not want this additional unit of oil from you, you would not shut down your oil well. You would say, okay, let me take a hit on the marginal quantity of oil that I was selling in May or in a particular day or a particular month, instead of shutting down my oil well, because shutting down the oil well will mean I will have to incur huge costs and time delay later on when I want to restart it. So it's also the way this business is run. On a piece of paper, it makes a lot of sense. Demand, supply, and shutting down supply. But in the oil extraction business, that doesn't happen.
You'd mentioned earlier that the countries that control the price of the oil, the OPEC countries, there was a lot of mismanagement that went on and their handling of the pricing of the oil went out of control. So why didn't they take the decision to cut the production of oil soon enough? Did they not anticipate that the oil demand would go down this much, or they just didn't want the price of oil to go down?
So part of the problem is that the fall in demand has been quite fast. I mean, quite sharply. It has come down, especially because of the coronavirus spread. But even before that, you have to understand that while their commercial interests are aligned and they should, and for the longest time they did, at one level, did work in consort and sort of fixed prices in more or less a seamless manner. But there are all kinds of geopolitical tensions. Two countries may not necessarily get along with each other on various other factors. Both are oil producing or oil exporters. So something similar was happening for a while now, and things came to a head in early March, where Saudi Arabia and Russia, they fell apart and they sort of started competing with each other. And because these are huge oil exporting countries, there's also this belief that you could possibly make the other one back down. You must also remember that when it's about production cuts, because oil prices are falling, you could cut production and sort of bring them up at a certain level. But then who cuts the production? There is always a fear that if I cut production, if I as a country cut the production, then somebody else doesn't really respond by production cuts, then I will lose the market share to the other country. So there are all these kind of geopolitical issues also. And somehow that mechanism obviously has broken. And that is why all countries are now actually competing with each other. And that is how there has been this race to the bottom. Now, everybody is producing more oil, even when they know for a fact that demand is coming down. And to the extent that demand is falling much more sharply than what even they expected, the situation just became even worse.
Does this crash of the US oil market, how much does this affect India?
You see, the crash happened in WTI, which is West Texas Intermediate. It didn't happen in Brent. It didn't happen in, say, some of the Gulf oil. But the weakness in oil prices has happened everywhere. Even Brent has weakened. Other crude oil prices have also weakened. Across the board, all related energy prices have weakened. So while this was a more localized US-specific issue, because US has also now become, in 2018, it became the largest producer of crude oil in the world. So while the glut is a lot to do with US conditions and the fact that this is US oil and it is inland and transportation is not so easy. So if you're storing, storage can get over and then you are all of a sudden looking at a glut. Yet India will be affected in a positive manner to the extent that oil prices will remain weaker for the foreseeable future, because overall demand would be low, production cuts may happen, but still oil prices are already below 20 right now. So India will benefit. The only problem is that India itself is going through a terrible lull in economic activity. You will benefit when you use oil. If you do not use oil, you won't benefit. So basically, the toss-up is that, yes, it is true that oil prices are low and that should help India's recovery. But India's recovery and demand itself is facing a huge question mark. So when the demand recovery happens, it would help us. But how soon would that be? How quick would that be? That is difficult to say right now.
And in the end, we talk about the coronavirus outbreak in India. It has now been a month since the Janta curfew was announced and the government started to put restrictions on movement due to the coronavirus outbreak. The current lockdown is scheduled to end on the 3rd of May, and the government is looking at various options for a gradual lifting of the lockdown. Sources also say that after it is lifted, India could see a second wave of the outbreak in the late May or early June. In this segment, Abantika Ghosh, who writes on health and who has been extensively reporting on the coronavirus outbreak, joins us to talk about the preparations the government is making for it.
So what government sources are telling us is that just as lockdown happened in two phases, first there was March 22nd when 75 districts were locked down. Then there was March 24th when the entire country went into a lockdown. So when it is lifted, again, it will be in phases, and it will definitely be more than two phases. It will be in many phases. There'll be gradual relaxations, not even phases. It will be like gradual. Whichever district qualifies in terms of management, whichever district does not show new cases for a specified number of days, that district will see relaxations. If there's a new case, then again, the lockdown will come back. So this will be an on and off kind of a thing. So, there'll be no one unlocked down in the entire country at one go. That is definitely not happening.
The government is also hoping that India's doubling rate, essentially the time that cases take to double themselves, decreases over time. What is our doubling rate right now, and how much is the government hoping it will become?
So our doubling rate right now is 7.5 days. And this doubling rate is actually counted from Monday to Monday. The Monday thing is just for standardization across the country. That was written in the letter that Health Secretary Preeti Sudan sent to the states, I think, a couple of days back. Maybe last week, I think she sent it, in which she had identified all the hotspots and the clusters and all that. So doubling rate right now stands at 7.5 days. That's the national average, but there are many states who are doing better. There are some states who are doing worse. Kerala, for example, right now has a doubling rate of 72.2 days. That's 10 times almost of the doubling rate of national average.
And that's the slowest doubling rate we have when it comes to states, right?
Yeah, which basically means that the rate at which new cases are reported is the slowest there. That's what we call sort of flatten the curve. Or in Kerala's case, it's almost bend the curve.
And where is the doubling rate towards the highest side? Which are the states that are showing the highest doubling rates?
States like Maharashtra, West Bengal, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, these are showing doubling rates which are more than the national average. In fact, that is why there are these interministerial committees that have been formed by the Home Ministry and sent to some of the districts in these states to find out what can be done better, what are the gaps, if any, in the current implementation.
And what does the government hope this doubling rate be going forward, let's say by the end of May or April?
So here's the thing. The government is hoping that maybe end of this month or just before the lockdown period comes to an end, the notified lockdown period comes to an end on May 3rd, maybe that's when we'll hit our best doubling rate of maybe around 12 days. That's the hope, that sometime around that week we'll hit about 12. But there is also this realization that as places open up, as interactions grow, as businesses start operating, there will be a second flush of cases. There will be a second wave, even if it's not as bad as the March peak when our doubling time was 3.5 days. So government sources are telling us that 3.5, hopefully we will never go to again. But May end, beginning of June, maybe we are looking at another peak when hopefully we'll be able to maintain a doubling time of 5 days. And this, they're saying 5 days, they're hoping because they think that by now people have gotten used to all these precautions such as hand washing, wearing masks, social distancing, and all of that. So, in other words, they're hoping the people have by now actually learned to live with the virus, and that should give us some protection and keep the cases from sort of going through the roof. But yes, there is a realization inside the government that we are looking at a second wave sometime in the next 2 months.
We are also, we mentioned that, some states have a much higher doubling rate than the national average. We are right now seeing that cases are concentrated in particular areas. In our paper, we have published that on an average, 69% of all COVID cases in a state are concentrated in just 3 districts. So what is the plan going forward for these districts? Are we essentially going to see restrictions continuing in these places and an easing of restriction in, other places?
In hotspots, yes, definitely hotspots, till there are hotspots. And the definition of hotspots is that either there's a large number of cases in one area or the doubling time is less than 4 days. So in hotspots, yes, you will see all these sealing, cluster containment, all these exercises, contact tracing, testing, all of that will keep happening. The government is hoping there'll be far more testing. With some part, they'll eventually also move to mass testing at some point of time. There'll be voluntary testing. So anybody who has symptoms and wants to be tested will be tested, unlike earlier when you went to the hospital with a cough and cold, and if you did not have contact or travel history that warranted that you could have gotten the virus, they would send you back. So all those things are going to change. But yes, essentially, till a place qualifies as a hotspot, there'll be no easing of restrictions. That the government is very clear.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it. Share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.